I'll be getting started here in just a minute. I'll be getting started here in just a minute. Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm gonna be getting started here in just a minute. Gonna be doing on a workshop. It's gonna be a kind of extension on one of the previous workshops that we did on creating an LNURL pay server. But this one, we're not really gonna go much into LNURL or anything like that. We are just gonna be taking what was built in a previous workshop and build on top of it to try to kind of like create a framework for building a more scalable API using Express. So what we need to do is we're going to go, everything is on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/pleb-devs, this is our PlebDevs GitHub. And you'll see I've made this repository, Tips for Scaling Express API. So also, I'm going to give a quick plug for our website, which we just got up and running a couple weeks ago. So if you go to plebdevs.com, you'll see kind of everything that you need. All our links are in one place. Here's our courses. So if you want to kind of go more into backend stuff, you don't have much experience with it, that's what we're doing today. But this course here will give you a good foundation to build on. Here's a link to join our Discord. So this is a great place if you want to come and ask questions, get help, or just share what you're working on. Here you can see past workshops we've done, a link to our YouTube video, and then at the very bottom you'll find our GitHub. So that's where we're going to be working from today. So again, I think I was already there, but going to Tips for Scaling Express API. So for, let's see, 1 second. All right. So I'm trying a new thing with this workshop. The previous ones we've done like slideshow style. Bitcoin PlebDev does a good job of kind of giving a primer on it with the slideshow and then going into some code. I wanted to try with this one, basically everything you need is in this repository. So if you go to github.com/pleb-devs tips-for-scaling-express-API, links for all this stuff will be also in the description of this video. But so what I wanted to do was basically, if we look at the commits, I didn't get it. I was trying to make it nice and clean and only have commits that were needed, but ended up kind of cleaning some things up at the end. But if you go to the commits, you'll see this initial commit is a fork from the project that we're basing this off of. So this is the initial commit, but then after that, it's everything that I've added into this repository. And I started by, each commit is numbered kind of like by steps. So you can start to get an idea of what we're going to be doing. We've already built the project, but now we just want to organize it, improve our error handling, and then also make sure that we're able to validate the requests that are coming into our API. So I'll go through the basic structure of what the project looks like, but I'm just kind of trying to give a high level of what we're going to be doing here. So yeah, basically the idea is you should be able to start here, follow along with this workshop, but if you ever get lost, we're going to be going through these steps one by one. So say you make it, you're following along, and then you get lost, just check out this commit and you'll be back to where we are. And there's a few things like creating a source directory, which I should have done at the beginning but didn't, and then also some linting and using NodeMon I added at the end. So if you want to follow along with this, you can add those at the end, or if you want to take advantage of those tools, I'm gonna be doing that right off the bat, so you'll be able to see how that's done. And then also the README has some more instructions, and you can check out the commits, or you'll also see that I tagged them. So let me just open up a terminal here and let's clone this code. So all the code is here, but we just need to clone it to our local machine. So the easiest way to do that is just copy the code from there and then say git clone, and then that. And now we will cd into there, and let's see where we're at. So this is on the main branch. So this is basically the finished project. So we can see what's in here. There's just a few things. Most of this is our source directory. If we list source, we'll see there's some directories in there, and we can also use this cool thing tree, which will show us the full structure of the project. So how do I make this go away? There. So yeah, this is basically what we're trying to get to by the end of this workshop, but we are going to start from the beginning. So what we'll do for that, like I was starting to say, I tagged everything. So all these instructions are in the README if you want to just follow along from there. But if we do git tag-n, you'll see everything is tagged, and it didn't work like I wanted it to. If you guys have feedback on like kind of how these workshops are done, if you prefer the slideshow at the beginning or just this whole process, let me know. But at first I was thinking it'd be cool to do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, but then those didn't end up lining up with these commit messages, and then the 10, of course, got pushed back up to the top. But basic idea is there. You can see there's 10 tags tagged 1 through 10. So we're on the main branch now. Remember, this is what it looks like. But if we say git checkout 1, which is saying check out the tag called 1, now we are at tag 1. And so if we do ls now, you'll see it's a different project. So I'm going to go through what we already built in a previous workshop. If you want to go check out that workshop, which I recommend doing, especially if you don't have much experience with Express, if you go to the README and then go to resources, you'll see the lnurl pay workshop, and here is everything you need to get started and get to the point that we're at now that we're building from in this workshop. So we open up this project, and it's just a few files. This is our index.js file. This is where everything for the API starts. So we're importing everything that we need. Right now we don't have a .env, but what this is doing is loading our env file into the environment so that then it can be used. It can, like, all those environment variables can be accessed with process.env.backend or whatever the variable name is. Again, all this is in the last workshop, but there's some routes. So this, when we say app.get, that means it's a get route. So there's just the main route, there's /lnurl. So this will be when you have an encoded lnurl, then you can make a get request to the /lnurl endpoint, and you'll get this response. This endpoint is for generating a new lnurl. And then you can see here, this get /lnurl returns this property callback, and it ends with /callback, and so that's what we end up defining for this route here. And then there's a few helper functions in this lnd.js file, one for connecting and one for creating an invoice. So two things that we're going to need to do to get started. You'll notice here there's process.env.lnd connect URI, and here there's another environment variable backend URL. So I'm going to start by creating a .env file just so that we're able to run it. So in this .env file, we will look at this. It is backend URL. So this should be basically whatever URL we're running our project from, but maybe for some other reason you want to generate an ln URL that has a different domain name, or maybe just a different host. So yeah, now we've got the backend URL, and now we need the lnd connect URI in here. And so how do we get this? Well, we go over that in the other workshop, but what we can do is we will open up, we're going to start Polar. So you can go to Polar, just look up Polar Lightning, and there should be install instructions. From there, you'll need Docker downloaded. And then we will just run it with Polar-Linux, and that should start it. There we go. And it pops up over here. So I'm going to go into this, and this is our Polar all test environment. It's already running, which is nice. So what we're going to need to do, say we want to connect our node to Alice, we'll click on her and go to connect, go down here and go down to lnd connect, and we'll just do the admin URL, but notice we're using gRPC. That looks right in here. We're using the lnd gRPC library. So I'm just going to take this admin one, but maybe depending on, like, if it's for a LNURL pay endpoint, then maybe you don't want anyone to be able to spend your money. You just want to create invoices, so you could use this URL. But I'm just going to use this one, and we'll just stick this in here, and we should be pretty much ready to go now, except for there's a bunch of packages that are defined in here, but we haven't installed any of them. So we're going to go npm install. And that will just look through this package.json and install any of the packages that we don't have, which is all of them. So now we should be able to run it. So our entry point is index.js, so we'll run node index.js. And there we go, server listening on port 3000. So I mentioned there's some other tools that make just the development process just more fun to deal with. So one of them is NodeMon. We will install that, and it's not required for the actual production deployment of this project. So we're gonna run npm install and then add this save dev flag, which will save it as a dev dependency. And so we're installing NodeMon there, and then what we're gonna do is in this scripts section, we are going to add dev and then say nodemon index.js. So now what we can do, dev is now a script, something that we want to execute. So we can say npm run and then our script name, which is dev. And you'll see it starts it up, but it's saying it's watching. And we can restart anytime with rs. So if I type rs, hit enter, then it'll restart our server. And it's also watching here. It's saying it's watching everything. So anytime a file changes, like say I just changed this for a second, then down here our server restarts. So that's just kind of nice for not having to worry about stopping and starting. And then the other thing that I like is linting, which just helps you write clean code and usually catches some mistakes. So I put all that in the README here. You can see here's instructions for nodemon. And then here we're going to install some ESLint plugins. Copy, maybe. Maybe I didn't copy it over here. There we go. We'll install those, and then we're going to create a .eslint.rc.json. And you can go into how this is all configured depending on how you like your code to look. But this is just a very, very basic configuration. So we'll just copy this from the main branch and add this in here. And it might give us some things that it doesn't like. Looks like everything is good. So yeah, so this is basically like we installed nodemon so that our project will automatically restart, and then linting just kind of helps you write clean code, and it'll like check these imports, which we'll probably see later. So now we got our project running. A few development dependencies installed. And so let's move on to step 2. You'll see, can I open another terminal? There. Let's see, if you go, git tag -n, we can see all our tags again. So we just did pretty much, now we're on step 2, add directories, controllers, middlewares, utils, and routes. And so this is basically going to be, I'll talk through it as I go. But right now you can see we don't really have many files. We have 2 main files that are actually like have our logic in them. But what if you wanted to add some more endpoints? Right now all you can do is get an LN URL and like request an invoice from an LN URL, but there's a bunch of other LN URL methods, like LN URL withdraw, for example, and so that requires another endpoint. And so after a while, do you really want to put all of those into this one single file? It makes sense for a small project because it's just easier to just put everything right there. But as it gets bigger, you need to figure out how you can keep things organized and make sure that your project is scalable. So to do that, this is sort of like, you can kind of do whatever you want, but there's some standards like used by the Express framework. But really it's all just names, what we call these files that we're going to use for organization. So I'm going to create controllers, and I'll talk through what each one of these are. So we've created controllers, utils, we're gonna make middleware and middleware slash validators. And then let's see what else I made. I think, oh, and routes. Yeah, routes. So mkdir routes. So now we have all these. I mentioned that I didn't add the source directory until the end in the commits. So I'm going to do that right now. But if you're trying to follow along right with how the commits are, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of nice. Right now you can see in our files, we have all these, and then like kind of our random things like packages and configuration files. So by creating, if we create a source, which is standard, then we can put all of our source files into that source directory. So I'm gonna move everything that I just created to source. And now I'm gonna move the index.js and lnd.js into our source. So we'll run mv index.js and lnd.js into source. All right. So now, let's see, can I zoom in on this a little for you guys? There, it should be easier to see now. All right, so where are we? I'm just gonna open up another terminal. Now it's starting to look like what that overview looked like at the beginning. We have node modules, package.jsons, and our source directory. Also, if you do ls-la, you'll see all your dot files as well. So now we want to go into our source to start organizing things in there. What do we got? We got index.js. So index.js is our entry point to our server. So there's a question in the chat. How do I run the eslintrc.json? It's not really something you run. So make sure it's .eslintrc.json, and then when you install, here we installed in our package.json, we installed eslint, and I'm not sure, sometimes you might have to restart VS Code. Maybe you need the eslint plugin or the eslint VS Code plugin. I have that installed. I'm actually not sure what's required for the linting to take effect. But if it's not working, I would make sure you have the eslint plugin installed on VS Code, and then also try restarting VS Code. Maybe that's why I didn't have any linting suggestions. You can also do, it should lint on save. It should just lint all the time. And then if it won't, like, it will just give you recommendations. It won't auto lint unless you configure that. But I'm gonna try and close this and open it up again and see what happens. But I think you shouldn't really see anything right now. That would show that it's linting, because the code is perfect. All right, maybe I shouldn't close VS Code. It's taking a minute to start up here. Hello. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so Someone in the chat said it's working. I just have to right click and select format document. I guess that maybe that is linting. You can do. I have in my settings. Sorry, it's my computer's being slow. In my settings, let's see. How do I get there? If we go to our settings.json somehow. Here we go. In settings.json, I have editor.format on save is set to true. So this will, when you save it, this will automatically format your file. So getting back to this, I was saying, so our index.js is our entry point for our server. So we want to keep this outside of these other directories. Like this is the first file that gets hit when we start our project, and that's why we say main is index.js and why we use index.js as in this script to start the project. And that's, as you can see, everything gets defined in here. We define what our app is. We run this connect function. And finally, at the bottom, we say app.listen on port 3000. So we want to keep this out here. But I'm going to move LND into utils because I think of it as a utility. It's like utilities are kind of sort of helper functions, any tools, but things that you want to reuse across multiple files that don't really have, they just kind of perform one task. They don't really have like a specific, they don't fit into your project structure perfectly. Maybe inside this utils directory, then you have like lightning utils is another directory, and as your project grows, you'll get more utility functions that you can classify and then organize even further. But for now, this is fine. And then what we're going to need to do, something else. So we have this index.js in our source directory, but I also like to make index.js files in all of my other directories. So we'll say touch, which means create file, touch controllers / index.js middleware / index.js, and I'll show you why I like to create index files in all of them. It may seem a little bit tedious and redundant at this point in the project because, again, we only have a few routes. We don't really have that many files. Like, we're not adding any functionality in this workshop, so all of this may feel just kind of like an annoying task to do. But I promise, when you've been working on a project for a really long time and you didn't take these things into consideration to start, it's just more annoying because then you have to deal with it later. And it's hard to... Something to think about is building a scalable project, meaning like it can continue to grow and it doesn't require significantly more effort as the code grows to add more functionality. So we have, let's see, we can use tree, which isn't like built into Linux or anything, or if you're on Mac, you'll have to I know I had to install it on Linux, sudo apt install tree. You can probably use brew to install it on Mac as well. But it's just kind of nice to see your file structure. So now we have an index.js file, and all of these, I guess I'll just make one for all of them. So we'll go utils index.js and middleware / validators index.js. Okay, so now we have index.js files in all of them. So I'll show you why this is nice. Basically, with these index files, we're creating a central place to export all of our functions within this directory. So let's see, I forget what's next. So we created these directories, moved lnd into utils/lnd.js. So I'll show you what I mean with this. So we're going to go to lnd.js, and let's see here. See, we do module.exports. We're exporting these two functions, connect and create invoice. So we can go into our index file and say import, well, let's just do import lnd. Sorry, this does not work. We need to do const lnd equals require lnd, and then we'll say module.export. So this is everything we want to export from. So we imported lnd from here, and now we want to export lnd from this index.js file. So you can imagine, as we build more utility functions and files within this directory, we'll import them all into this one central location and export them. So now all we have to do is say import or require from utils, not like the individual file names. So, and you'll see when I think it was this, yeah. Before I had lnd, this is what the linting does. It says lnd is declared, but its value is never read. And it doesn't like that, because what's the point of defining a variable if you're not going to use it? So then when you type it in, then that goes away. So now what we're importing here from lnd, we're importing this whole thing. We're not importing these two. And I did that for a reason. Let's see. Well, that's okay. We can change this, and then we're going to end up modifying this more. Again, see some linting here. This is nice. /lnd is not found. So what we want to do is import lnd, because that's what we exported, from utils. And now we can call, remember, lnd exported that object, and then we're just importing that lnd object. So now we need to say lnd.connect. Connect is a property on this lnd import. And I kind of like this for, it's just nice because now we know, what's this connect function? Oh, it comes from lnd. We're connecting to lnd. It just makes it a little bit more obvious what's going on here. And there is one other function, create invoice, here. So see, doesn't like it, it's not defined. We need to do lnd.create invoice. So now I guess it would be prudent to make sure that this runs. Does not run. So it's because we moved our index file, so we need to go in here and change the path to our index to the correct path. But you'll notice we save, and where is this coming from? Cannot find module. Does this need to be changed? This is coming from, it's saying cannot find module, which this file doesn't exist. /index.js doesn't exist because we moved it into here. So it's code module not found. Where is this happening? Look at my dev script. dot source. Thank you there. And it still doesn't work. Is this? What's wrong with this? Sorry about this. Let's see if this works. Node. Node source. Okay, so I think it was because I was in the source directory. It was running this script from within. I was in /source, so I was trying to look within there for /source/index.js. So just make sure, for the most part, you're in the root directory. All right. So yeah, so we did. So you can see here we've exported LND, and that's all good. Now it's time to look at what's next. So, and then now we need to move, then import routes and handlers. So we could call handlers controllers. So we went through utils, basically utility functions. Controllers is where you want to put all of the logic that controls your routes. Basically, like when someone goes to /LNURL, what do you want to happen? You want this function to execute. So I'm gonna do this in so we did routes and handlers. So what we're gonna do is go into routes. Within this index.js file, we can say we're gonna need to sort of, how do I get rid of this? Redo some of the things that are in here, but here we're creating an Express app, but now what we want to do is create our router. So we can say Express is require Express, and then so we're not creating an app because we already have our app going. We're creating a router and Express, so that we're using express.router. And now we're gonna have some endpoints. We're gonna have some base endpoints. So we're gonna have router.get/callback. And this is gonna use a callback controller. So we could just call it callback controller. So this is the function that we want to execute when we hit this endpoint. So we can go and grab that from here. We're going to go to our controllers. I'm going to make another file, callback controller.js. We will say const callback controller is an async function, and module.exports equals callback controller. We may add more functions in the future in here, so I don't want this to be a default export. I want to export this as an object. We're getting this error. It's because we haven't imported LND. So imagine doing this later in your project and having to change all of these imports. Might as well do it at the beginning. So we can go here and we're going to import callback controller. And then, I'm still used to that. We need to use require. And then module.exports equals callback controller. So now we can go to our routes, get this, and import it. And see, we're just importing it from controllers. We don't have to import it directly from the callback controller file. I'm already 40 minutes in and still got a ways to go, so I'm going to try and finish this in 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, so we got our callback route, and now we need our other routes. So let's see, we can just get rid of that. We'll do something to make sure these routes get used in a second, but for now we're just going to get rid of that. Now I'm going to take this whole thing and move it into our index routes. And here I'm gonna do two different things. So here we're saying /callback is just gonna use this callback controller. But with our LNURL endpoints, we have multiple of them. So let's create another file and say, call it within the routes directory, LNURL routes. And one thing that, like, it may seem redundant to say, put this in routes and then call it LNURL routes. But when you end up with, like, well, we could have callback routes, we could have callback controller, we could have callback middleware. So then when you're looking here at your files that you're working with, it's just nice to know, oh, this is the controller file. So we're going to have to do the same thing and say that, and then we're going to say, so here's something. Right now, we're going to say router.get, and we're just going to say /. And that is because in here, we are going to say router.use. So basically we're saying we want to use everything from LNURL routes. And I guess here I'll show you this so that it makes more sense. We'll take care of all these errors, but we have to say const router equals require routes. We need to make sure that we are exporting that here. And so now we're importing everything that we attach to this router object. We're importing it into here. And now instead of all of these routes, what we'll say is app.use. We want to say this is from our root, and then we're passing this router in. So now our app, it's gonna, whenever it hits this / endpoint, then it's gonna go to the router. It's gonna hit the router, and then it's gonna start going through all this. If the URL path is /callback, it'll hit this, and then it'll call a callback controller function. Then it's going to go, if it's LNURL, then it's going to go and it's going to look at these LNURL routes. So just for sake of time, I'm not going to move this function to a controller's, or to its own controller, but you get the idea. Like, we have callbacks at the callback route, and then we could create in here a LNURL controller, or maybe you want something more specific, like this. We're just kind of having all the LNURL stuff is going in here, but there could be LNURL withdraw, and LNURL pay, and LNURL auth. So you could have LNURL pay controller. Just helps keep all your functions separate. But for now, we're just gonna say, okay, router.use /LNURL. So when we hit this /LNURL endpoint, now we go into LNURL routes. So we don't need this here. We can take this and move it into here. And I am just going to, this is a get route, but really what we're doing is creating, we're calling encode URL, and we're creating a, we're creating an LNURL. So what we want to do actually is do router.post, and remember we hit here, this is already /LNURL. So when we hit here, it's just a slash, but really by the time we've gotten here, we've built up our, like, our route looks like, or the URL that we're requesting looks like this. And then this is going to be a post request. And let's see, I think I copied that. We need to import batch32. Okay, so we've got that. And now we need our last LNURL route, which is this one. So we can attach that here. And notice all of these functions that we're using have a request and a response object. So anytime, like how we in the callback controller here, we're passing it into this router, and the callback controller has a request and response. And that's how how Express is able to chain these functions together. And we'll get more into that with middleware. So we can get rid of this. So now what we're saying is listen on port 3000, and when we hit port 3000, and we're using this /route to then go to the rest of our router. So we're not using these. We're probably going to need to import this somewhere in LNURL routes. Where is crypto? It's in callback controller. Let's make sure this runs again. Doesn't run. Router.use requires a middleware function, but not an object. And that's, let's see, let's just look. So here, importing router, which should be fine because here we're exporting it as that. Callback controller. So here we're exporting callback controller. Oh, It's because we exported this as an object. No. Yeah, we destructured that. Put that in there. What is it not like? Modules. It's in our index file. Line 6. Router. So it doesn't like this. Maybe it's undefined. This is why we have, just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip ahead. So rather than debugging this import export, so where are we? We basically did this. We're here. Everything is, we've done the routes, and now we're on step 4. Build an error handling middleware function. So if I say, let's see. So what we want to do is, this is going to be a little annoying, but restore everything. And okay, we moved that. Get checkout 4. I'm just kind of starting over. But now we have these files, and let's see where we are. So we've created an index.js file in all of these. We're exporting this, and this should all just work. There we go. So now we need to build some error handling in. So if you do git tag -n, you'll see I included this command here in tag 5. So we want to, basically we're going to use these two libraries, express async errors and HTTP errors. Express async errors allows us to, in our routes, throw an error and have it trickle down to essentially a middleware function at the very end. So it says it's a dead simple ES6 async await support hack. All we have to do is require it in. It says somewhere before you start using it. So we need to do this. And you can see having that source directory that I just got rid of kind of makes things nice. It's like we know a little bit more where we are, but that's fine. So I'm going to require this in. And so now basically when this gets required, it's going to run this library and everything will happen like magic. We can look a little bit more. Async functions, they say, already work fine in Express, so you can use an async function within a route, which we've already been doing. And here we're saying use this middleware function and then throw an error. And then we're using this function that has this error object on there. And basically this throws an error, and instead of just like crashing your app or breaking your API or sending some weird error to the front end, what express async errors allows you to do is come and create this middleware function at somewhere basically at the end of all of your routes. So what you want is for it to, everything to trickle down to that function, if that makes sense. I'll show you here in a sec. That looks like it didn't work. Okay. So we installed that, and I'm gonna just move along. Let's see, where are we? We installed, and now we're on to building an error handling function. So see if this works how I was expecting it to. We need to say, we need to restore, get checkout 6. Okay, so now we're on this commit, build an error handling middleware function. Sorry, I think I tried to cram too much into this workshop, so might fly through some of this, but we created this error handling middleware within this middleware directory. So we have this error handler, and we're exporting it, and again, we're doing that same thing within our index.js, where then we export everything from here. And this is because I had a spelling error. I think I fixed it later, but middleware, and I wasn't able to import it. But anyways, so then here, from middleware, we're importing error handling middleware function. And then down here, after our routes, so we have this app.options, app.get. This is actually wrong. This should be up. So we want it to hit our routes, everything within our routes. And then at the very end, hit this error handling middleware function. So I did a little thing here. So we can see there's a route. If I run this, there's a route at localhost 3000/error. And if we hit that, it's going to throw an error with the message that it gets from the query. This error is going to get thrown. It's going to end up in our error handling middleware. And it's going to start with this. So let's see what happens. If here, since I'm demoing, I'm just going to go to the next one just so we can see all of it at once. So then what we're doing is now we've added this HTTP error, which I will talk about in a second. But what I changed this to was we get the message, and now if there's not a message, we're going to throw a new HTTP error. And this is just a nice, clean way of throwing errors with HTTP codes. And if there's not a message, it'll throw that. Otherwise, it'll just throw that error. And then we can see here, which this error is going to end up trickling down to this handler. We have a switch statement where we say, if the error is an instance of an HTTP error, we will basically take advantage of the information that's in there. The error.status code will send that with the error message. Otherwise, it'll be a 500 error. So if I go here, we've got localhost 3000/error. Missing message query parameter. We can look in our console at our network tab. We'll make the request again and see we got a 400 error. And that's what we said that we wanted. But if we say message equals this is an error, then we end up getting this 500, and it says this is an error. And the reason we get a 500 is because it went through all of our error checks, and 500 means it's an HTTP code for like something bad happened and I don't know why. Like anything in the 500 range is something wrong, like on the server side. And then 400, which we said here, 400 exactly means a bad request, like missing a message query parameter. Like in order for this route to work, we need a query parameter, but you didn't give us one. So we need to tell you that was a bad request. But like the whole, with everything that is in the 400 range is like something wrong with the request that the client made. Okay, so this is nice. We have basically improved the way that we catch our errors, because what we would have needed to do without what express async errors allows us to do is not have to say like, what do we do? Try, throw a new error, catch the error, and then say like throw new error, or we wouldn't even want to throw this error. What we would want to do if we weren't using express async errors is say like res.status500.send, so that it's actually sending this to the client and not just like throwing errors and breaking our API. But with express async errors, we are able to eliminate that. And then another thing that we used was HTTP error. So you can, the nice thing about default exports is you can name it whatever you want. I always see people, they call it create HTTP error, but I think it makes more sense to just say import HTTP error from HTTP errors. And now that gives you some options. You can specify the error code like this, or you can use, so that you know kind of what the error code means, you could say bad request, and this will end up doing the same thing. It'll end up being a 400 error. All right, so we've improved our error handling with these two libraries, express async errors and HTTP error. They're both pretty simple. Again, express async error, you just make sure, the most important thing is that this function ends up at the very, like, just put it at the last thing. Make sure it's the last thing that's used, so that when you throw any errors anywhere, they end up here. And then you can start to, maybe if you threw a 500 error, you want to handle it differently, or you have different types of errors that you can create customly, then you can catch those and deal with how you handle that error. All right, I think the last thing that I wanted to do is kind of a lot, so I'll just go through it all briefly and probably end up doing a more in-depth workshop on it, because I think that it's really powerful. And that is request validation. So the docs on this are actually pretty good, so you can just go and read those. I'm just going to check out the end. I don't know why I capitalized that. Okay. Get stash. We need to get rid of everything that we have, so that we can check out the main branch. So this is the final stage of the project. Sorry, this is kind of all around. I was trying to make this all make sense with the way that the commits are and everything. I'm gonna have to work on this process to just make it all flow smoothly. But so this should be everything except a few missing steps. So we went through the building and error handling middleware function and throwing and catching an HTTP error. So then what we end up doing is we npm install Express Validator. Express Validator is a library that allows you to validate, well, yeah, let's just check out their docs. Allows you to validate requests to your API. So this is sort of kind of the basis of it, this validation chain. So let's see, they have an example here. App.post, and then this is the route. And then here, they're defining basically what they're saying, what they want to validate here before calling this function that will handle the request. So what they're saying is get the email property from the request body and then apply a custom function to it. And so look to see if there's an existing user. So they looked in their database. If there is an existing user, then they're going to throw an error. And because the user already exists and this person's trying to sign up. Let's see, we can go to the guides, and there's a little better example there. Here, see, they're saying get the person property from the query and check that it's not empty. So if we could have done this same thing with our error route, we could have said query at message not empty. So again, I recommend going through this guide. It's pretty good, especially if you follow along with it. But I'll just briefly show you this last part, schema validation. So this I kind of like. So like the way that this works, right? We're defining these things in our route, which is nice if it's something just like this one property. We want to make sure it's not empty. And they show somewhere in here, if you want to like kind of create a bigger chain, you should make a function out of it, rather than like saying validate person equals this. You want to say like create person query validator, and that would be a function that would then return this. But yeah, so let's just go through what I have here real quick. So this is middleware, but I say it's a validator, so I'm putting it within this validators directory. And I created a callback validator. So like I said, what I prefer this schema validation, which is we define our validation using a JSON object. And here there's these two properties, username and password. So here we're saying this is what we want our request to the callback to look like. So this is the callback request schema. Should look like this. There's going to be one property that we want to validate, and that is amount. And that sounds right, because when we go here to our callback controller, see, now this is where it's nice that we're all organized, because it's like, oh, where's that function that controls our callback route? Oh, it's the callback controller. Anyways, here right at the top, we extract the amount from the query. And how are you supposed to generate an invoice if the person didn't give you an amount? Well, you could do something like amount equals rec.query, and then say if not amount, And then we have our HTTP errors in there, so we could say throw new HTTP error at 400 missing amount query parameter. That's weird. So that works. But what if you had multiple query parameters that were required? You had 2 that were required, and then 1 that was only required if another one was present. Or just, there's a ton of things. You want to make sure this amount is a valid number. It's not like letters. So that's where Express Validator is really nice. All we have to do is say this is what we want our request to look like. It should have an amount property. We're saying in means where do we want that amount property to be? It should be in the query. Is int, that's true. ToInt means like convert. There's Express Validator has where is it? They have sanitizers, validators, and modifiers. I'm not sure where in the docs that is, but basically there's three things you could do with this incoming request data. You could validate it, which means make sure, is this valid data? You could modify it, so that's what this toInt is doing. So like when it comes in the URL as a query parameter, it's going to come in as a string, but if it's string around 1, the number 1, even though it's a string, like it's still an integer. It's just came in the URL as a string. So we can call toInt so that by the time it makes it to our controller, it's been modified and it's now an int type. So we don't have to convert it to a number within here, which will be important. We're going to need a number to pass to create invoice, or yeah, see down here where value is equal to parse int amount. Because we're using this validator and saying toInt, we're converting it to an integer, and we don't need to say that later. And then this, we say what do we want our error message to be? Amount must be an integer. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe this means, is it able to convert it to an integer? And that it should be able to convert it to an integer. And here is a custom sanitizer where it's returning parse int. Yeah, sorry about that. So this is a sanitizer that makes sure that it's an int value, but I'm actually not sure what the difference. ToInt. ToInt. Where did it go? Is int. It doesn't really give you much. I think these are yeah, these are where is it? These are standard validators. So the Express Validator library is built on something else. Is built on validator.js. So I bet that is int comes from here. So honestly, with this, I was just building this and my GitHub Copilot told me to put that there. So I just hit tab and it did it. But anyways, you get the idea. These are validators. So confirming that this is an int, and probably this one is like, are we able to convert that query parameter amount to an int? And then this one is the sanitizer that will actually set that string value to an integer. So then we use this check schema function from Express Validator, and we just run our schema through there, and we can export that as our validator. So now, anytime a request comes through this validator, it's going to use the request object, look at the amount, property, and validate that it's right. So how does this actually get used in our routes? We exported it here. And then from our routes file, we can import callback request validator. And so when it hits the callback, it's immediately going to go to that callback request validator. And we can see that real quick. Well, I'm just going to start the project real quick. Oh, install it. Okay, so we'll check out what our request is going to be. We already have this here. So we're going to callback, and callback requires an amount. Let's see if I can run that now. Okay, so oh, that's weird. Now it's running. Okay, so we're validating our callback request. Here, we will send in just, well, no, sorry, that was wrong. /callback. And it returns this thing, errors. Amount must be an integer. We can say $amount equals ABC. Again, we get that error. 1, 2, 3. And it's loading for a second, and then we get the invoice. So notice I have this handle validation errors function on here. This is the best way that I could figure out how to do this. Maybe there is a better way, but I created this handle validation errors middleware function that I end up putting on all of my routes that I'm validating the request on. So what you'll notice if I remove this and restart it, and we try to do this again. Oh, maybe that's because it thinks it's hex. Let's go just /callback. See, we get this ugly looking error. Bad request error, missing amount query parameter. Actually, that's because I left this in here. We'll remove that. That way. Doesn't even catch any errors. Okay. Well, I thought this should have thrown an error, but actually it's just creating an invoice without an amount. But it's not validating that we put an amount. We want to make sure that it put an amount. And what you'll see here is it logged what this did, console.log validation result in request, is it logged this error and then the result where we have this array of errors, and one of those errors is amount must be an integer. But we never actually did anything with it, and so that's where this handle validation errors function comes in. If you put it right after your validator, then you'll hit this, and it will use this function from express validator to extract the errors, and then it will say if there are errors, if errors is empty, then get those validation errors and return them as an array where the status code is 400. And whenever you're making middleware, make sure you use this next function, because what happens if errors is empty? That means we basically just skip over this and everything's all good. But if you didn't put this next function in here, Express wouldn't know what to do. It would be like, what do I do? But by saying next, you're like, go to the next function. We didn't return anything yet, so just keep moving along. So yeah, when I go to callback controller, actually it's in routes. When I go to routes and add this back in here, now it's going to get that error, return it to us, and it's going to log from handle validation errors. It's going to log this errors array. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, maybe you just want to return, you don't want to return all the errors at once because that's just a lot of errors. Maybe you have a ton of things that got validated and you just want to just return the first error and then they fix that and then send another request and then continue fixing errors. Whatever you want to do there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll quickly go back through everything that we did here. So again, this is a fork of a previous workshop building an LNURL pay endpoint, but now we're refactoring it so that we can scale it, make it more robust, make sure our errors are caught, make sure our data requests are validated properly. So here is our entry point. Now that we've, this is kind of in here just for demonstration purposes, but really you could remove, maybe you want this one just to know that your server is running just in case. But you can really clean up your index file to just everything that you need to define your app. Like this is kind of very high level what's going on. And then what happens is we're saying, let me just keep ending up below, but one thing that we're saying is we want to use everything, like basically all routes are gonna, unless it's this route, all routes are gonna get redirected to the router that we built in our route directory. If there's any errors that are thrown in those routes, then we're going to use this error handling middleware, which is different than the handle validation errors middleware. This error handler will handle each error depending on what it is that you threw. And if it can't figure out what kind of error you threw, then it'll just throw a 500 error. And so then so if there's no errors, we hit this route. We go here. And we have a couple things. We have /callback, which is just going to handle the callback. That's just going to be our controller. But the request is validated. And then if it's not at /callback, then it's going to go in here and it's going to check, okay, if the route is /LNURL, then go into the LNURL routes. And okay, is it a GET request? Yes, it's a GET request, so execute this function. Or is it a POST request, still just at /LNURL, then execute this function. And you could put more things in here, like router.get /LNURL. This is the suggestion. Encoded LNURL. I don't know, maybe you would want like LNURL ID. So then it would be at /LNURL, but then if they provided an ID next, then it would execute this function. And finally, we added some validators. We just did a callback validator with this one amount parameter, but if you look through the docs, it's a pretty rich library with a lot of options. And if there's not an option for you, you can use, just like that custom sanitizer, you can use custom, and then you say options, the value, which is this amount, and then the function that you want to execute, and you can either throw an error or you can return false and then say error message, and then that's what your error message would be. Something else that's nice is I think you have to destructure it. You can get the request object, and then you can do other sorts of, like, if you want to, like, this amount should exist, but only if some other property in the request exists. So you would say like if rec.body dot something, and like amount doesn't exist, then you would return false or whatever you want to do there. Yeah. Say that's pretty much it. In here, is there anything else? Again, our Discord, join that. Happy to answer any questions. If there's things that I went too fast over, feel free to join us in there and let me know what you need help with. And yeah, this is kind of like the three things we went through. We went through organization, error handling, and request validation. And then at the bottom, there are links to these libraries and the LNURL pay workshop. So yeah, that's all. I think we'll be doing another workshop next weekend. So hope to see you guys there.